Rain pounded the roofs of cars, flowing in murky streams into the city sewers. The night city, tired from the bustle of the day, was sinking into a slumber, punctuated by the neon of signs and the lonely headlights of taxis. Time flows differently at such times, slowly, viscously, and dangerously. Lillian ran out of the 24-hour drugstore on the corner, clutching a paper bag to her chest. Inside was a life-saving, but expensive, medication for her mother. For the past 3 years, she had been not just a daughter, but a caregiver, a nurse, and a wet nurse all rolled into one. Working during the day, caring for her mother in the evenings and at night. Today, her mother was feeling particularly ill, and Lillian, throwing a light coat over her pajamas, rushed to the drugstore. The rain instantly soaked her light brown hair, but she didn't notice. She was thinking only about one thing. If only she could get there in time, if only her mother would wait. She approached the crosswalk. The green light blinked, urging her to hurry. There was no one near her. No cars on the road either. Silence. Only the sound of rain. She stepped onto the crosswalk, clutching the precious packet of medication. John left the nightclub in high spirits. The air was thick with premium alcohol. His head was pleasantly heavy, and his phone with a dozen new numbers in his jacket pocket. He was young, rich, and, he thought, invulnerable. His black SUV, polished to a shine, was waiting at the entrance. Friends offered to call a taxi, but John waved them off and climbed behind the wheel. The interior filled with the scent of leather and his perfume. The engine rumbled. As he pulled out onto the avenue, he turned up the music to drown out the doubts that were still trying to break through the alcoholic euphoria. The road was empty, and he allowed himself to speed up. Images of this evening flashed through his mind. The rain intensified, and the windshield wipers could barely keep up with the torrents of water. At one point, he glanced at the nav screen to change the track, but when he looked up, it was too late. The headlights revealed a figure in the darkness. Fragile, feminine. She was standing on the crosswalk. But to John, it seemed as if she had appeared out of nowhere. He slammed on the brakes as hard as he could, but the wet asphalt played a cruel joke. The SUV skidded. There was a dull, terrifying thud against the bumper. A body flew over the hood and landed on the wet road a few meters ahead. The pharmacy bag tore open, and the pill packs scattered across the asphalt like confetti, immediately soaking in the rain and turning into a multicolored mush. A ringing silence reigned in the car. The music was still playing, but John couldn't hear it. All that echoed in his ears was the dull thud. He shook. He exhaled a cloud of steam and, disbelieving what was happening, fell out of the car. His legs were wobbly. He ran to her and fell to his knees next to her, right into an icy puddle, not feeling the cold. She was lying on her side, her arms spread out. A dark puddle was spreading from under her head, which the rain immediately diluted. He noticed a torn bag and some medications. Their names meant nothing to him, but he understood the main thing. She wasn't going for a walk. She was on a mission. She was saving someone. John, his hands shaking, took out his phone and called an ambulance. His voice cracked as he gave the address. Lillian had fallen into a coma. The doctors in the emergency room shrugged their shoulders. Severe traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures. There was a chance, but he needed expensive medications, surgeries, and rehabilitation. In the hospital corridor, John saw Lillian's mother for the first time. It was a haggard, pale woman who, despite her illness, he later learned she had serious heart problems, had found the strength to come. She didn't yell at him or hit him. She simply sat on a hard plastic chair and stared into space. That look was more terrifying than any accusation. It held the emptiness that only hopelessness leaves. John paid for everything. Up front, without haggling, he paid an exorbitant sum for a private room, paid for the best intensive care specialists, and the necessary medications not covered by standard insurance. Lillian's mother accepted the money. She had no choice. She had to save her daughter. But she didn't say a word of gratitude. She didn't speak to him at all, only occasionally raising a blank stare that made you want to sink into the ground. John's lawyers were already circling him like vultures. They insisted they could negotiate, that he was intoxicated, and that it was a crime. They could hire the best, and they would get him out, smearing the girl's reputation across the pavement, making her look guilty. But John suddenly realized that prison was the last thing he feared. He was afraid of mirrors. Every morning, when he looked at his reflection, he saw not a rich kid in an expensive suit, but a killer on a wet road. He saw scattered pills and a lifeless body. The alcohol wore off that same night, leaving behind only a hangover of conscience, which was 100 times worse than the physical one. He started coming to the hospital. At first, he just sat in the hallway, afraid to go in. Then, a week later, when Lillian was transferred from intensive care to a regular ward but still unconscious, he asked her mother for permission to visit. She nodded silently. He sat by her bed and looked at her pale, bruised face, at the tubes entangling her body. He talked to her. Nonsense. All sorts of nonsense. He talked about his empty life, about clubs, about money. He asked for forgiveness. Many times. Lillian woke up 2 weeks later. The world returned to her painfully. Through pain throughout her body and a hazy haze before her eyes. The first thing she saw was the white ceiling of the hospital and her mother's face, stained with tears of joy. And then he entered the room. Handsome, well-groomed, but with a haunted look, with dark circles under his eyes, like someone who hasn't slept for a long time. He was holding a huge bouquet of flowers and another bag of medications. Lillian didn't immediately realize who it was. And when she did, her heart skipped a beat. It was the man who had almost taken her life. His mother, worried, left, leaving them alone. John sat down on a chair. Silence hung in the room, ready to burst at any moment. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now, he began, fiddling with the hem of his jacket. I know it won't change anything. I just want you to know. I'll pay for everything. Any surgeries? Any rehabilitation? In Switzerland? In Germany? Wherever you say. Lillian was silent, studying his face. Were you at the pharmacy? For Mom, he asked, nodding toward the door. Yes, her voice was weak but firm. She has a bad heart. If I hadn't gone that evening, if I had died, she wouldn't have survived this. You would have killed us both. John swallowed the lump in his throat. I know. I want to help. You already helped. Mom said you paid for everything here. But, Lillian paused, choosing her words. Money isn't everything. My life is different now. I'm afraid to cross the road. I wake up at night to the sound of brakes. And every time I close my eyes, I see headlights. What should I do? He blurted out, almost desperately. I don't know. She closed her eyes, making it clear the conversation was over. But she didn't remove her hand from the blanket when he covered it with his own. 3 months passed. John didn't disappear. He came every day. He brought fruit, books, a tablet with the movies she loved. He hired the best nurse to help Lillian's mother around the house. He personally found a clinic in Germany that specialized in rehabilitation for such injuries and paid for the full course. When Lillian's mother needed urgent heart surgery, her nerves and worries had taken their toll. John paid for it too, without asking permission. Simply presenting her with the fact that everything was already decided. He stopped being the self-assured rich kid from the club. He quit drinking completely. He sold his SUV and bought a regular sedan because he couldn't bear to look at black cars anymore. He started working in the family business, not just for show, but truly invested. As if trying to fill the void inside with meaning. His friends couldn't understand where the old John had gone. They invited him to take a break, but he refused. He spent every evening at the hospital or at their home. At first, Lillian was hostile to his help. She thought it was just a way to pay him off, to relieve himself of the burden of guilt, to buy himself an indulgence. But then she began to notice the little things. How he waited hours for her test results, nervously biting his lip. How he didn't hesitate to help his mother carry her heavy bags from the store. How he looked at her, not as a victim, not as a burden, but as someone to whom he owed, if not his life, then at least his peace of mind. One day, when she had already started walking with a cane through the park of the clinic in Germany, he sat next to her on a bench. They silently looked at the falling leaves. You know, Lillian suddenly said, my mother prays for you every night. She says that God sent you to save us. John smiled bitterly. I almost killed you. What kind of savior am I? You didn't almost kill me, she countered, touching his arm. You hit me, that's a fact. And you could have just paid the lawyers and disappeared. Your friends probably advised you to. But you stayed. Every day. You didn't run away from us. You didn't run away from me. And that's worth more than any money. Money can't buy time. But you gave us yours. A year later, they returned from Germany together. Lillian walked almost without a limp, only limping slightly on her right leg when tired. John carried her bag. Their mother met them at the apartment with pie and happy tears in her eyes. John was no longer a stranger to them. He had become part of their small family, the son Lillian's mother never had. That evening, the three of them drank tea together for a long time in the kitchen. John watched Lillian laugh at one of her mother's jokes, and for the first time in a long time. He felt the air in his lungs no longer weighed down by the weight of guilt. He hadn't atoned for her with money. He had atoned for her with time, care, presence, and a sincere desire to become a better person. Later, as he was leaving, Lillian came out to see him to his car. She stopped at the entrance. "John," she called. He turned around. "I've forgiven you. I really have. Go in peace." She turned and walked into the entrance, leaving him alone under the street lamp. All was quiet, save for the rustling of the trees and the sound of a car passing somewhere in the distance. John looked up at the night sky, where a light rain had begun to fall, took a deep breath, and got into the car. For the first time, he sat behind the wheel calmly, not because he feared punishment, but because he finally understood the true value of human life. A value he had learned through the most terrible mistake of his life. The rain grew heavier, but now it no longer inspired terror. It simply washed the dust off the clean, washed sedan, driven by a completely different man.